of Chatham salt marshes. This is requested by the Energy and Climate Action Committee on October 22nd, and I will turn to Greg Berman, who's going to introduce a member of the Climate Action Committee.
Great, thank
Welcome.
you very much. Greg Berman, your Director of Natural Resources. And with me is Gerry Stahl, a member of the Energy and Climate Action Committee. As you saw in your agenda report, this is a report out of what is now the first salt marsh study. This salt marsh study was supported in the May 2023 annual town meeting, and that has just wrapped up. It was performed by the Center for Coastal Studies. We have a additional 2025 town meeting for the rest of the salt marshes. So the first study that we have the report on was for those first 4 marshes. Now we're doing the rest of the marshes. I'm just trying to look here. You know, we had some excellent results, and I think Gerry's going to share that with you. And once we wrap up this second study, that's when we get into the prioritization and management and adaptation methods that we might be able to use. So,
Greg, before you introduce Gerry, is the second study, the one that's ongoing, is that also being done by the Center for Coastal Studies?
It is. The RFP and contracting just wrapped up a week or 2 ago.
Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. So the package for tonight's Select Board meeting contains Greg's quite comprehensive background description of this research. It describes the technical studies that were conducted by the consultant, the Center for Coastal Studies. It also details the funding source, which was the Community Preservation Act. Finally, it links to the technical report submitted by the consultant, as well as to a report to Chatham residents from the Energy and Climate Action Committee. And it's this last report which focuses on the issues of climate change, specifically as they apply to South and West Chatham, that I'm going to talk about. So if you download that report from the package, you'll have most of the images that are in my presentation. So here are the 4 marshes along the Nantucket Sound that were studied last year. And here are the main points of tonight's presentation. A, what are the facts about climate change, specifically for Chatham today, up to date? B, how much of Chatham's salt marsh is likely to be lost in the coming years? C, where could new salt marsh form in the coming years? D, what are the latest predictions for flooding and wave surge in South and West Chatham? And E, where are the biggest threats to neighborhoods by flooded roads in South and West Chatham? So we start with the primary indicator of future climate change, global warming, and sea level rise. That is the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Despite all claims about reductions in carbon emissions, the basic fact is that the amount of carbon in the atmosphere is still increasing and even accelerating. Specifically, Barnstable County is experiencing warming temperatures even faster than the world in general, and that's predicted to continue and accelerate. Similarly, the sea level is rising faster around Cape Cod, even than most other places in the world. This is at Woods Hole, and this is at Boston, the closest sites to us. This is a century of measurements by NOAA at Woods Hole and in Boston. Unfortunately, the study that we had adopted dated and overly conservative predictions of sea level rise from the United Nations report, but we can easily adapt the prediction years based on more realistic predictions from current local data. So in this chart, I've compared various predictions, including the newly adopted Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model, marked MCFRM, which we'll discuss later in the presentation. And I believe that the best predictions are those of MCFRM, which I've used in this report. So we turn now to the most important finding of the marsh study, the likely loss of 2/3 of the healthy marshes in South and West Chatham. This chart is directly from the CCS report. They figured out how much marsh would be drowned by sea level rise and how much land around the marshes would be suitable for the marsh to migrate to upland, taking into account sedimentation of sand and slope of land, which they measured very accurately. They could not take into account houses in private ownership. That's something that our committee, the town, and the residents will have to think about in the future. There are many threats, other threats to the marshes, and the study alerted us to the presence of purple marsh crabs, which can destroy marshes and have become a real problem on Cape Cod. Our committee is already and Greg and his people in the town are already working on this problem, but there's no clear solution to it at this point. Perhaps our most important finding from the study and the analysis by the consultants is the detailed prediction of possible future marsh migration, which will help us decide what to do about it. Here's the map by the consultants in red of migration areas possible in future target years, combined with Chatham's parcel maps of ownership of properties that are overlapping the possible migration areas. That's in South Chatham, and this is in West Chatham, the same kind of mapping. So you can see how many properties are affected or are blocking possible future marsh migration.
Gerry, can you please explain what you mean by migration and what its benefit is?
Yeah. So you can sort of see in this map that, so here's some marsh along here, the blue, and the blue over here, our current marsh, and they're likely to be flooded. They're likely to be submerged as the sea level rises. There won't be any plants there, any salt marsh grasses. So it won't be a healthy marsh environment. But what the marsh tends to do is so-called migration upland, so it moves up to higher levels right around the marsh. And that's what these, the different colors show where it's likely to be in different years, in 2050, 2070, and by 2100, the different shades of red. And what happens is that, well, as the sea level rises, the water goes higher on the land, and so it can support marsh grasses there.
You see.
But if there's a house there, then that's a problem. Or even if it's just private property and people put up some kind of fence or whatever to stop it. And basically, you can see from this map, just sort of eyeballing it, that a good deal of the potential place for marsh to move to is blocked right now by private property. So I think this is going to be an issue for the town in the coming years as sea level rises, as a lot of these homes start to get flooded. What are people going to do about it? They can't get insurance and so on. Maybe they can't still live there. Maybe the town wants to somehow take over the property, or put it in the land trust. Some of these properties are already town-owned and some are already in the land trust, but most of them are not. There's a couple that don't have any houses on them, and this is the kind of analysis we can now start to do, given the predictions of where the marsh is likely to be able to move to. The whole theory of the study was to see how we can preserve the marshes. We know a lot of it may be flooded. Some things we may be able to do to stop the flooding, like add some sand carefully to raise the level of the marsh. That may or may not be possible in different places. There may be other solutions possible. But one possibility is just to clear the land, some land for the marsh to move to.
Thank you.
And that's what we really, and they did a very thorough studies of elevation. They have very fine-grained elevations data now that we can use, which we didn't have before. They looked at the slope of the land because the marsh can't go up too high a slope. So they took that into account. They started to look at sedimentation. So some sand washes in and builds up the level of the ground. Some old marsh plants die and stay there and build up the level of the ground. So they've taken all those things into consideration and modeled it and so on. And so now we have that, which we can combine, like here, with our own information about properties and who lives where and so on. So yeah, so in those two maps we just saw for South and West Chatham, there were over 400 properties involved, and we have to look more carefully at each of those. Some have houses, some are undeveloped properties. As I say, some are owned publicly. So the next study, as Greg mentioned, is actually starting this month to look at the other 9 salt marshes with the same consultants to get the same kind of data for all of those. And then we have a picture of marshes throughout Chatham, all the major marshes, and the data that we need to do analysis and to be able to prioritize where we should talk about doing some interventions to help preserve the marshes. And here's some ideas for interventions. And it's going to have to be a combination of work between our committee and other committees and town staff and the people who live in the neighborhoods. So here's the 9 marshes. You see they cover altogether, including the 4 we've already looked at. They cover a good part of Chatham, sort of all the seaward areas. Okay, so now we're going to take a quick look at predictions for South and West Chatham from the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model, which is newly adopted by the state to study climate change throughout Massachusetts. So here's their predictions for a major flood in South and West Chatham, overlaid over the map of properties. The model that they use is, so previously we had FEMA maps, which looked very similar to this, but the FEMA map only looked back at historical floods not taking into account future climate change. And it's what they call a bathtub model. It just looks at how high the water will be everywhere, like this might be 3 feet above current tides. But the new model is very probabilistic and takes into account climate change is going to change the kind of storms that come here, and they modeled thousands of possible storms, and this is the probabilistic model result that they came up with. And it's very detailed, so you can blow this up down to, a couple feet and see exactly what's predicted to how deep the flood will be at a given point. And also, they did the same kind of model for wave surges. Big waves coming in through storms come even higher than the flood, and this is how they might be distributed. This is a key thing where marshes are really important. If you have a marsh, if you live in one of these colored areas and you have a marsh in front of you, when the waves come and the storm comes, the marsh buffers you from it. It cuts down the wind and the waves, and it also draws the water away after a flood. If you don't have marshes there, if they're all dead, then you lose a major protection of homes along those areas. And there are quite a few of Chatham's homes are in those areas. One aspect of this is so-called low-lying roads, which may be the most critical thing for the town to think about starting right away, and they are working on it. So if you look at the roads coming in, the 3 roads that come into the major beaches along there are all going to be flooded by storms soon, and they will cut off access to all of those houses that are in those 3 colored areas. So Cockle Cove Road, when it closes down there from being flooded, it cuts off access to and from 97 homes, which means not only the residents can't get out of there and their homes may be flooded, but emergency vehicles can't get in there either. Ridgevale has even more, 122 homes cut off, and Harding's has incredible, over 400 homes would be isolated by a flood of Harding's Beach Road. And this just shows the properties in each of those neighborhoods. So imagine over 600 homes being evacuated from South and West Chatham when a big storm comes in. Where would all those people go? How would they be supported for however long the flooding lasts? And so on. Okay, so climate change and sea level rise pose difficult issues for Chatham, and our committee is trying to collect accurate and critical data to help everyone understand the challenges and to explore responses. Any questions or?
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Shireen?
Gerry, thank you very much for the report. It's really informative and a little ominous, I'd have to say. Just want to comment that those latter predictions were in the year 2070. Was that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
One of the things there's a couple of things, just an observation. I think the last big tides we had, Oyster River, Marsh was totally flooded in a way that people were sending my family pictures just to show us, simply because we've never seen it like that. So, I mean, the occurrence of flooding in that area is getting more and more dire. So the next steps are to do do the other 9 salt marshes in the community, and then to start to think about a management plan that includes mitigation in some capacity. Is that the next recommendation that ECAC would bring before the board?
Yeah, I think the idea is, for instance, low-lying roads, I showed 3 of them. There are others around Chatham, and there was a little study done by Cape Cod Commission, I think.
Yep.
I didn't think much of their study. It didn't really look at, it wasn't tuned to Chatham at all. It was really tuned to a place like Sandwich, which had a lot of businesses that could be flooded, and so a different structure totally to the road system and the housing and so on. So that's why I'm trying to develop these maps of the flooding related to the housing there. And when we have them for the whole, almost all the low-lying roads are in marsh areas in the floodplain. So when we'll have a pretty comprehensive view of them after the next study, and then we could prioritize which ones to do something about. Each road, I think the commission came up with a price tag of around $1 million per road minimum. So it's fairly expensive to do that kind of mitigation. But you see, there could be hundreds of houses affected. And so where are the town's priorities in something like that?
Tell me about the purple crab. It's invasive, obviously.
Yeah.
And I mean, what does it do to a salt marsh that it's detrimental to a salt marsh in general?
Actually, this shows what it did by Harding's Beach.
Okay, I get it.
So,
Yep.
Greg and I went out with somebody from an expert about these crabs who's been dealing with them at the National Seashore, where they've been a real problem. And we walked, and that's where I took this picture. So what they do, especially near the ditches, is they burrow and they eat the roots, especially of the vegetation of the salt marsh grasses. Other crabs don't eat the grasses, but these crabs eat the grasses and kill them, and then nothing grows there. And you have these mud flats here, which will eventually be flooded with no grass, or eroded away with no grass to hold them in place.
Do you know if they're edible?
I've asked a number of people, and nobody's tasted them.
Okay. All right.
They're also nocturnal, which makes them hard to find. They burrow under. We did find a couple of them when we went out during the day. There's no known solution to them. They used to be controlled by predators, especially fish.
So fish are the predators?
Certain fish, and apparently there's not as many fish around as there used to be.
Not in Nantucket Sound because of the seals, so. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the work that your committee's doing, and the report is really, really interesting. And thank you so much. Continue up the good work.
Jeff?
Thank you, Jerry. Great report. I look forward to kind of downloading and studying those maps a little bit more closely. It's a little difficult to understand what's going on, but I think you guys are hitting all the high points. And I was very interested in Shireen's question on, after we map the next 9 marshes, what are the next, when would the town and the select board and folks receive recommendations on actual action plans for amelioration or for assistance to preserve our marshes? It seems like a big order for me, but it's a very important one. So
Yeah, it's hard to answer because we don't know what this study's going to find. That's why we're doing the study. Like these crabs, they came out of the blue, the purple.
Yeah.
And, we were not expecting them. The consultant was not expecting to find them. They sort of just tripped over them. And so we'll be looking more carefully at the other 9 marshes to see if where there were certainly a lot of them at Harding's when we just walked out there. So in some sense, we don't know even what kind of recommendations might be made. The other thing is that Greg works very closely with the committee. So, for instance, the crab thing came up, and we didn't have to, come make an agenda item here and come and present and have you vote on something. He just went out and got this expert from the National Seashore and some other people and started looking into it right away. So we have a good working relationship already with staff. So some of it gets taken care of that way.
So is it fair to say that we have at least a baseline, if you will, on the four marshes that have been studied thus far, and then we will also have a baseline for the next 9 marshes that you guys we're going to...
Exactly, yeah. Baseline data is the way I look at a lot of it.
Yeah.
Like,
I just have a question about, and I understand the prioritization of the marshes that are closest to low-lying roads and properties, et cetera, developed properties, but how about I think one of the most beautiful and large marsh in Chatham, which is at the not Stage Island, but Pleasant Bay. I think baseline ought to be studied there as well. Because it's right in the middle of Pleasant Bay, and it's impacted by the Atlantic rushing in and out all the time with high tide. So I think
Pleasant Bay, of course, has the Pleasant Bay Alliance, which Chatham is part of, that has already done a lot of these studies.
I misspoke. It's Strong Island, obviously, but I would hope that we get baseline data there as well, because I think it's probably fairly indicative of climate change and sea level rise. But I don't know if the Pleasant Bay Alliance is doing it or not. Maybe Greg does, but I'm not familiar. It's just a beautiful marsh. It's gigantic.
Yeah, no, truly beautiful. So our marsh studies are actually somewhat modeled off of the Pleasant Bay Alliance's studies that were done throughout those marshes. So we didn't want to duplicate anything that was already done, but Strong Island was included in that Pleasant Bay Alliance work. We have partnered with the Pleasant Bay Alliance on a variety of things. That's one thing where they, took this data from the marshes, and eventually, once you get all the marshes involved, you start doing prioritization, finding out which marshes can be, have opportunity for adaptation, and which marshes are doing just fine, and which marshes really have no ability to migrate at that point and might need to be just observed. But, that's our next step after getting all these, and the consultants are going to be providing us with these recommendations and adaptation methodologies. When we were out looking at those purple marsh crabs, one of the very few things that Stephen Spear from the Park Service was talking about was placement of sand over top of the burrows will displace those crabs. So, kind of the dual benefit of thin layer deposition along with crab, prevention. But there's also, is it actually, it's not killing the crabs, it's just pushing them off to the side. So more work has to be done. We don't want to push them somewhere else by accident.
Right.
So we're proceeding, but cautiously.
Thank you, Greg. That's very helpful. And just not to overstate the obvious, but I have deep concern about the causeway and the Little Beach area, and you talk about low-lying road. Hopefully that's part of the study going forward.
Yeah, and I can follow up with that for just a second if you want. So, the low-lying road project from the Cape Cod Mission, focused on that Morris Island Road a bit and the tide gate. We then did a follow-up request for a municipal vulnerability preparedness grant, which was not awarded. Since then, we've identified and allocated town funding to do that study and research, looking at the tide gate and Morris Island Road adaptation alternatives. So that is a contract that's in place now, and we start expecting results, and we will bring them to you when we have them. Another low-lying road was up off of Crow's Pond, and that was another one that we applied for a grant with the Pleasant Bay Alliance to take a look at that one that wasn't funded. So, even these things that aren't funded, we're trying to find ways to keep things moving.
Super. Very helpful. Thanks, Greg.
Corey.
Thanks, Jerry.
Jerry, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. Would it be safe to say, too, that the work on the marshes is also very hand in hand with beach nourishment because, I mean, when you showed it like the Hardings Beach, Ridgeville, Cockle Cove Forest, that stretch, I mean, that beach has changed drastically. I mean, and you know, from when I was a little kid to where it is now, and all the beaches being, you know, blown away, and it's starting to creep into the marshes. I mean, over between Cockle Cove parking lot specifically to where the retaining wall is, that is dropped back considerably, and it's creeping up on that marshland behind the Chat Harbor Lane area. And then you go further down, that barrier beach is kind of getting beat up pretty darn well. So, I mean, we got to keep our focus too on some beach nourishment, because if we don't, it's just going to accelerate. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And just to follow up with that one, that's literally another grant that we applied for. That one was not funded either. But we have, you know, identified some funding through the Mill Creek Jetty work that's going to look at depositing that sand and working with Cockle Cove and Bucks Creek and an analysis of the Nantucket Sound shoreline sediment budget. One, to make sure that our dunes are in place to be able to protect the natural resources like the marshes, but two, that, you know, the sediment's not making its way into our estuaries, or if it is, what needs to be done, whether it's a regular dredging regimen or whether, you know, we're putting too much or not enough down in the right time. So that's going to be the results of that study when it comes out.
Any other comments or questions from the board or the public? Well, thank you very much, and thanks to the committee. I'm sorry.
There's
on?
one question.
Oh, Brian Phillips, sorry.
For the record, Brian Phillips, 374 Orleans Road. I guess my question is, how does building, you know, non-permeable surfaces, houses and pools in flood zones or coastal conservancy districts affect kind of that information you just presented, like the, you know, like the flood patterns or the, you know, the ability of the salt marshes to migrate properly, and kind of anything else it would have to do with that type of stuff? Thank you.
Well, obviously, they would get in the way of a marsh, and we do have the wetlands laws that protect a lot of property from new construction like that would be in the way of the wetlands. But that's something we have to look at more closely, is where in some of these maps, where there are obstructions to the marsh moving impermeable, as you say.
And just on a lighter note, after talking about all the grants we didn't get, one of the grants that we did get was a SNP Technical Assistance Grant that looks at the coastal resilience zone, if you will. So that's the floodplain as it's impacted by sea level rise, and the Cape Cod Commission is going to be working with us to provide extensive outreach and stakeholder input to see, you know, what regulatory changes may help, what impacts it would have to the town, how it would in fact impact private property. So that's kind of coming along the way.
Well, again, thank you both for this really very helpful and informative report. I think the board, I think I speak for the entire board in saying that when the rest of the study is completed, the other 9 marshes, perhaps we would look to the Energy and Climate Action Committee, and maybe you could collaborate with some other committees, as you mentioned earlier, like Open Space or Conservation, and maybe even the Planning Board, and come forward to the Select Board with a set of recommendations for mitigation and control of these issues, and as well as staff continuing to try to get more grant monies for us. But thank you. This is really very, very informative. I hope people paid attention to it. Thank you. Thank you, Gerry. Thank you, Greg. The next item on the agenda